forward to this month, and I said it this morning, I'll say it tonight, and I'll probably say it for the next few weeks. This is the month we have Thanksgiving, but I want to say thank you for all you do. Thank you for your love. Thank you for your kindness. I'll try not to sound like a broken record, but I think it's good to give thanks. Well, if you'll turn with me, we'll be looking in Luke chapter 6. We'll be looking at verse 43 through 49. This will finish the Sermon on the Plain. And so the Sermon on the Mount is 3 chapters long. The Sermon on the Plain is more like a chapter. Okay? Interesting how they do a little different. Now, once again, I do believe, and I reserve the right to be wrong, I think the Sermon on the Plain was a different thing, a different event than the Sermon on the Mount. Not all scholars agree with that. They're kind of divided on it. But I think they are at different places with different groups. But notice a lot of the information is the same. Because when Jesus preached to people, he had a lot of the same things to say. Whether they were Gentiles and not under the law, or whether they were Jews under the law, there's still sin. There's still need for salvation. There's still issues of the heart. There's still issues of one's actions and mindsets. All these things are accurate and connected. And I want to give it to you this way. You may say, well, I'm not under the law. And I'm not either. But Paul makes a point. He says in Romans, you had those that were under the law, those that weren't. Both sinned. Before you had the law, people sinned. After you had the law, people sinned. So the law has its purpose, but sin knows no bounds when it comes to humans. Because we're sinners. Well, we've gotten done looking at judging as well as loving, and those are two things that shouldn't, you think don't go together, but when you think about it, when we love people, we should not pass final judgment on them. When we love people, we should not have denigrating disdain for them or anything of that nature, but yet it's something we have to fight because our world does that. You can think of American culture, but you can think of any culture. There's going to be looking at people and looking down on them. There's going to be anger at other people, even though it's not right. Or there's going to be holding grudges. That happens because we're human. And so Jesus' word applies to America and every other country, every other culture. But that's not the end of what Jesus says. There's also basically the concept of two different things. Now, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus talks about the two paths. You've got the way of the righteous and the way of the wicked. Here he talks about two different types of people. So if you'll look at me at verse 43, he says, "For a good tree does not bear bad fruit, nor does a bad tree bear good fruit." Now, by the way, he's being general here, not exact. We do this too. It's a little bit of what's called proverbial, okay? A proverb is meant to be a general rule of truth, not in every instance at all times truth. Can you have a tree that normally does good and has one fruit that comes off bad? Technically, sure. But Jesus is speaking generally. A good tree does not produce all bad fruit, does it? And a bad tree doesn't produce all good fruit. It doesn't work that way. And one of the sayings that Jesus really uses in his ministry is, "You will know them by their fruit." Might I add, when it comes to save people, I can't look into your heart. You can't look into my heart. We don't have that ability. But we can, not judging, but just honestly observing, see people in their lifestyle. Whether they've changed, whether they haven't, whether they're having a good day or a bad day. We can observe those things. And so there are people you've seen all your life and they've claimed salvation. You can tell they're different. You can tell their life is different from before they were saved. Then you've got people that claim to be saved and they've lived no differently than they ever have. And that worries you. It honestly does. Verse 44, "For every tree is known by its fruit." Evelyn, if you don't sit upright, I'm going to get you. Sit right. "For men do not gather figs from thorns, nor do they gather grapes from a bramble bush. A good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth good, and an evil man out of the evil treasure of his heart brings forth evil. For out of the abundance of the heart his mouth speaks." Jesus is using a lot of figurative language here. So we're going to have to go back into ancient times for a second, so just bear with me. Something that he makes the point of, he's already said a good tree is not going to give forth all bad fruit, and vice versa. But also, and I know we can talk about, well, they have hybrid trees, but okay, you go to an apple tree, you don't expect an orange, do you? If you go to a grapevine, and my great-grandmother had a grapevine, and so it was always neat because she wanted to make raisins. And I found out after she'd asked little Jerry, "Would you like some raisins?" Found out real quickly, I don't like raisins. But each person's different. But I remember I didn't expect anything off that grapevine except for grapes. Okay? That's naturally how these things work, and that's what Jesus is saying. People that are godly or ungodly, it's going to be demonstrated because it's going to be out of their natural minds and thoughts that they will display it. All right? Verse 45, a good man out of the good treasure of his heart. Now this sounds very odd to me and you. What do you mean the good treasure of his heart? The word for treasure here has the idea of a storehouse or a treasury, a box that you put your gold or your silver in. Now, most people were not wealthy. The vast majority of people were not wealthy. It really hasn't changed, has it? Now, in America, me and you, we may be middle class. We may be lower middle class. But in another country, we may seem like we're rich. Okay? But looking at each country, by their understanding and their standards, very few people are wealthy. It's actually a very small number that are wealthy. But even the poor people would have a treasury box. Why? Because they had to store up what money they would have. They've got taxes they're going to pay each year. Especially in Israel, you're going to have to pay a Roman tax. You're going to have to pay a Jewish tax. Then you're going to have to pay a temple tax. So you've got all these taxes you've got to pay. Plus, sometimes you have to, even though you may barter for things, you may actually have to pay a specific price to get something specific. Maybe you want to rent land for a year, but they're going to say, no, I'm not going to take it on credit. You got to pay up front. So they actually would have these little boxes. You may say, why didn't they go to the bank? Because it didn't work that way then. They didn't have clear banks quite to the extent that we do. And so they would actually have to have a place where it was guarded. And out of there they would have treasure. And some of that might have been some of the gold or silver their grandparents had. And so it passed to them. And so you try to save what your family has so that way it maintains it. There's another place in Scripture where Jesus talks about out of your box you bring the old and the new. And what is that? He was actually using that with reference to teaching. My teaching is like that. You're going to take out what I say, but you're also going to apply it to new situations. It's the same truth, but it's being applied to a different context maybe. But here's the thing. In a treasury box, you may have coins from your grandfather's day, but you may have coins from last month. And these coins may be very different because depending on the time period, Israel may have been under Roman rule, or it may have been under other rule before that, or it may be under Roman rule, but you have King Herod. Oh, no, King Herod's dead. Now they got governors. Now you got a Roman governor. And every time you had a change in governor, you had new minting of coins. Because every governor's got to make sure everyone knew who they looked like, right? We do know that during the time of Jesus that you had coins of Pontius Pilate. By the way, ask me this question when we get a chance, but there's a whole question on something that supposedly there's a misprint of name on some coins of Pontius Pilate in Israel or in Judea. And that was brought up as the thing that you're looking at must be false. They found 5 coins that were authenticated and they were misspelled. So that's really neat stuff. So you would have these different things. Maybe you would even have a golden chalice. Most people are not going to. Maybe they might have a small little saucer or something that's used. These are valuables. You keep your valuables safe because they're part of the family and they can protect the family later on, right? Here's the concept. A good man out of the treasury box of his heart, what he keeps in there, what he holds valuable, out of that, he will bring out. So a good man's going to bring out godly, valuable mindsets, actions, thoughts. His very words will actually demonstrate that. But an ungodly man, an evil man, out of the evil treasury, out of his treasury box, what do you think he's going to bring out? It's not going to be the same kind of value. It's going to be hatred. It's going to be hurt, selfishness, greediness. It's going to be sick jokes. Those kinds of things. And so what's Jesus saying? Just as you're supposed to love your enemies, just as you're supposed to not judge others with final judgment, there's a difference between discernment and observance. But also, you're going to be able to observe people by what they do, because out of what they consider to be right and wrong, or what they consider to be important, they're going to demonstrate it in their lives, their minds, in their statements, in their words. When you think of it that way, that really all parallels. How so? You can look at someone and the way they live and the way they act and not pass final judgment, but come to the realization that person's probably someone I don't need to hang around with because they could get me in trouble. I remember a song. I grew up 90s, early 2000s, 80s a little bit. But I remember there was a song in, I think, the late 90s, early 2000s, and it was a song that my dad likes a lot. And I've forgotten the name of it, but there's a portion of it where it's about him and his dad. When he's a kid, he's playing Little League, and his dad basically gets asked to referee because there's no referee. And, ultimately, it's a hard call. I think a hard call to make. And ultimately, his dad has to, it doesn't tell you what happened, but he said, I'm pretty sure the ball hit me before I touched the plate. But when it's your dad, that's a hard call to make. Do you call your son out? Do you, the next portion of that song talks about the fact that he needed a ride, and he knew better than to get a ride with those guys. And something happens, and they all go to jail. He knew never to take that ride, but he still had the consequences of it. There are some people who can see, and it's not, you can do it without hatred, but you can observe that's someone I don't need to be around. All right? You can be in a situation and recognize that's something I don't need to do. You can look at a way a person lives, and you can quickly discern that that's not a righteous lifestyle. And so the response is not hatred. It's not, it's, I need to pray for them. I want the best for them, not that I hate them. There may be a family member, and you realize very quickly, you may love them, you may try to help them, but you realize I cannot actually trust them. You may love them, but you can't actually put full trust in them. That's not necessarily judgmental as much as it is being discerning. You're making a clear observation. How you respond to that will tell how you are. You're going to respond with vitriol or love, but also care. Because sometimes what you say and what you do may be out of their best interest. Because I don't want to put them in a situation where they'll go back and do something they shouldn't do. All right? I remember hearing, I wasn't part of this church, hearing of a situation where a guy had committed wrongful acts one time. And he got saved while he was in jail. He got out, and he got into a church, and he was honest with them about it. And they had seen the change that was in him. And he openly admitted he didn't want to be around people of a certain type because he didn't want to do anything. But they would also ask him to go over here to keep him safe. So they protected everybody. That wasn't being judgmental. It was protecting him. It's kind of like having a family member that truly is an alcoholic. Not someone who likes alcohol, someone who they cannot stop. That's the person that you keep away from anything that you're cooking with that uses alcohol because you're protecting them. Not because you hate them, but you're protecting them. Discernment. Notice what Jesus says at the last part of verse 45. For out of the abundance of the heart, his mouth speaks. So out of what you have within you, it will make itself known in what you say and what you do. Kind of like that treasury box inside. What you hold dear will show itself. Now, there's a lot of wealthy people. What they hold dear is wealth. But there are some wealthy people, what they hold dear are people. Now, it may not be as many of those. By the way, there are some very poor people. What they hold dear is wealth because they want it. But there are poor people, what they hold dear is people. Because they recognize it's not about that. I love the people in my life. I love others. Let me tell you something. Wealthy or poor, male or female, different ethnicities, it doesn't matter. You got sins, you got people that are lost and people that are saved. It's their decision. That brings us to verse 46 through 49, where Jesus kind of demonstrates the difference between these two types of people. Those that have good in their heart, we're going to refer to that as saved, and those that have evil in their heart, those that are unsaved. The values are different. But notice this, but why do you call me Lord, Lord, and not do the things which I say? Whoever comes to me and hears my saying and does them, I will show you whom he is like. He is like a man building a house who dug deep and laid the foundation on the rock. And when the flood arose, the stream beat vehemently against the house and could not shake it, for it was founded on the rock. But he who heard and did nothing is like a man who built a house on the earth without a foundation. against which the stream beat vehemently, and immediately it fell. And the ruin of that house was great. He uses another, in this case, something of a story format, an analogy, if you will. And so you have two types, just like you got two types of people, they can be likened to whether or not they listen to Jesus or not. The person who accepts Jesus as their Savior, they're generally going to listen to him. Sure, we're going to admit, they're going to have troubles. Paul talks about having troubles. Peter talks about it. James and Jude, they refer to troubles, sure. But generally, we're going to listen to the voice of Jesus. But those that ignore what Jesus says, his teaching, his purpose, what he says, it's like two different viewpoints. Jesus is stating that his teaching and his message and his work is a foundation. You build on foundations, don't you? Because that's where stability is. But when you build on something that's not stable, it's not going to stay. It will fall. And the idea is when these rains come, and they lived in a place where they only had major rains 2 times a year, but it would rain quite a bit. And so part of the things they would do, they would dig these deep wells or these deep cisterns, and they would collect the water so that way they could have water throughout that season. So when you get a lot of rain at a time, you're going to have a lot of erosion. If you don't have a stable foundation, guess what? It ain't going to stay. And we've seen on news or even on YouTube and other places how some of these floodings occur, and you can see houses carried off. In their mindset, you can almost imagine these places that are built on not stable areas just coming apart. And to their mind, that would have been a huge ruin. And so I want you to know there are people that say, well, Jesus thinks very highly of himself. Well, let me ask you this. Every person that says something like that, that could be true. But there's someone they're going to listen to no matter what. And the question may be, don't they think highly of themselves? Oh, no, I know they're true. Wait a minute, that's the difference. You trust them, all right? Was Jesus trustworthy? I think we can look at that historically and say yes. Was Jesus truly different than any other person? I think we look at that historically and say yes. Did Jesus truly die? I don't think there's a doubt from honest historical evidence that he died. The question comes about whether or not he was raised, and the evidence is unbelievably powerful that he was raised from the dead. He changed lives after the resurrection. And so here's the thing I want you to realize. If he's trustworthy, then it's not that he likes himself, it's that he's being truthful. Certainty can be misplaced, but certainty, if it's good, is something that gives us trust, doesn't it? So what Jesus said, what he taught, what he did was trustworthy. And so when he says, if you'll listen to me, it's going to be good for you, he's not full of himself, he's being honest. Basically, every parent, it feels like, says that to their kid, don't they? I've already had that conversation a couple times. If you'll listen to me, you'll do good. And that's not a pat on the back. I can speak from experience. Jesus could speak from true knowledge. And so when Jesus taught these things on the Sermon on the Plain, you can imagine, especially the large Gentile population listening, it probably would have been pretty amazing because they were taught to hate. They were taught to just judge by skin color. They were taught to judge by family history. They were taught to judge by social classes. And Jesus is saying, no, love them. Even if they're your enemy, love them. Do not pass final judgment. You don't have that authority and you don't have all knowledge. But he also talks about looking at someone else for their needs. He also speaks on the very fact that what you hold dear will be demonstrated in what you do. And so what is he implying in a lot of this? Do you hold me dear? Or are you just going to listen to me because I'm entertaining? A lot of people have looked at Jesus because they consider him entertaining or interesting. Please don't find Jesus interesting as much as you should find. I hope you find him to be truthful, loving, and honorable. He was who he said he was. He was the Son of God. He died for your sins and my sins. He was buried. He was raised again. He's on the right hand of the Father right now, and he's coming again. Hey, I find a lot of things Jesus did interesting. But I love him because he is worthy of all trust. So when you read the Sermon on the Mount or the Sermon on the Plain, you're going to see some things that make you go, wow, that's amazing. Then there's going to be other things that make you go, ouch. Why? Because you and we're sinners, and it's going to hurt us a little bit. Let me tell you one quick story. I remember part of his name, but I can't remember all of his name. There was a guy that was the son of one of the people that started the Muslim movement called Hamas. And they called him the Green Prince, is ultimately what he was called. He had a very hard childhood. Okay, his father was taken multiple times to prison, and his father actually was not violent, but he did kind of try to talk away the violence. In other words, when people are in trouble, no, wrong is wrong. But this young man ultimately wanted to kill Jews in Israel because he was so angry. Well, he got caught pretty quickly. He wasn't as good at that as he thought he would be. Then they asked him to become part of their network so they could stop the killing of Jews, stop the killing of Palestinians. And he begrudgingly was willing to do that because he thought, well, maybe I can get a hold of a gun and I can kill some Jews. As time went by, he started seeing, they don't hate me. At least this group, they don't hate me. That's strange. And then they said, get an education. They paid for his education. Wow. And they actually cared about him. How are you doing? How's your family doing? Now, these may be really deep cover people that trying to hide who they are, and then they said, hey, be sure to look at some other things as you're doing this, because we'll talk about things when you get ready. Well, then he ended up coming across some Christians. He thought, well, this is part of a situation with college. I can use that. So he got a hold of a Bible. He was not a Christian. He started reading it. And he said as the years went by, he wasn't a believer. He became a believer much later, but he said, what changed me was the teaching of Jesus. Jesus taught me to love my enemy. And before I started thinking I can't think Jesus is true, he did love his enemies. Jesus taught me to look at others and see what I could do for them and not respond with hatred. And yet I'm seeing hatred all around me and people responding to that. And he said as time went by, he fell in love with Jesus because of his teaching. And then as he looked more at Jesus, he saw Jesus really is God in the flesh. And so he got saved. And he saved many lives and then ultimately came to America because he probably would have gotten killed. And he will gladly tell you that terrorism is wrong. He will gladly tell you racism is wrong. But he'll love to point you to Jesus. Jesus changes hearts. All right? Might I add to you, not all Palestinians are terrorists. Not all Jewish citizens are loving. Guess what? They're human. But Jesus changes lives. There's been more stories I'd love to tell you about what I've read and what I've seen or who I've talked to. But you know what? Time's probably not going to allow that. I'll tell you this. I did talk to a guy that was a Jewish, he used to be part of what you'd think of as Secret Service. He was one of those. Very active, very good at his military ability. He became a believer. He's trying to reach his Jewish people, but he also prays for the Palestinians. Jesus changes lives. Hatred hurts lives. Are we going to be those that embody hatred, or are we going to try to embody the example of Jesus? By the way, our world will say, if you disagree, you are full of hatred. No. You can disagree and love somebody. We got families full of that. Let's follow Jesus, because he disagreed with the Pharisees. He even called them snakes and liars. And yet he prayed to the Father for forgiving them while they wanted and were having him crucified. Jesus loved even his enemies. So when we get back next week, we'll be looking at if memory serves me correctly, the centurion and his servant. Ooh, it's one of my absolute favorite narratives about Jesus. Any questions or comments?